We saw the pomp and circumstance in the Rose Garden yesterday, the promised via Twitter press conference that was to follow this victorious vote on Capitol Hill. How big a moment was that for Republicans generally and for the president to be standing there on a Friday when I would venture to say a lot of lawmakers probably were eager to get to the airport and get home to their districts before recess to commemorate the passage of this in the House?
Well, I think it's going to be a Cinco de Mayo hangover. I think that photos will be actually much more beneficial to Democrats coming up, particularly as we head into the 2018 cycle, and the vulnerable Republicans, those who voted in favor of this bill and going out and defending it in some of these districts, particularly in districts that Hillary Clinton carried. It's going to be a tough fight. And those images of Trump surrounded by people celebrating.
A lot of men.
A lot of men,
yep.
A lot of white men, not a lot of diversity we saw. Now that's, yes, this was a big moment for the president. We shouldn't discount that. It was a big moment for Paul Ryan. It was a big moment for Mike Pence. It was a big moment for a lot of people in the administration. But now the tough work really begins. Moving this to the Senate, already saying they're going to rewrite the bill pretty much from scratch. The lingering effect on how this is going to happen in the rest of his legislative agenda. They learned lessons. They got this through. They did a lot more outreach. They got special interest groups on board. But we cannot forget just how unpopular this bill is. We're going to get the CBO score next week. We already know what that said about leaving as many as 24 million people taking them off insurance, and how much money it's going to actually save, if any. So the CBO is going to rescore the bill, and they have a tough fight ahead of them. And
Edgerton, I don't know if the House Speaker keeps a journal, but if he does, and he were to go home last night and write about what happened, what went right this time around, what do you think he'd say?
Well, it's definitely better than the last time they tried to vote this bill, when they tried to vote on March 24th and had to pull it from the floor for lack of support from their own party. All the papers next day had the sad Paul Ryan face on the front page. So definitely he would prefer the photo of a celebration in the Rose Garden to that. But, this was what they needed to put momentum behind their agenda for tax reform and for some of the other legislation for the rest of the year. But it's going to change in the Senate. This is not probably what the actual law will look like if and when it's signed by President Trump. And also, Paul Ryan wasn't the leader of this last effort that got the bill through the House. This was done on a member-to-member basis. I mean, even he will say that. And President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence played a big part in whipping votes in the Republican Party. Paul Ryan wasn't the one that stitched together these last-minute amendments. That was done by members of his conference, largely along with White House and White House aides and staff.
Laura Davison, let me ask you about the lessons to be learned here as we move ahead to tax reform. This is off the plate of lawmakers in the House. Now it moves on to the Senate, as we've said, and they can focus on tax reform. What can they take away from how this fight was waged?
Well, I think that they really have learned that they have to be unified. They have to do their research going into it. A lot of Ways and Means Republicans, one of the committees of jurisdiction on the health bill, a lot of the members were really upset about how the process went. Obviously, they're feeling much happier now that they were able to pass it through the House. And members were telling me that, look, we've been working on tax reform for a year. They put out their plan last June. They've been meeting with constituents, hearing concerns, and they say making the plan better. They think that they're ready, and they've kind of learned from the mistakes of healthcare. They know how to negotiate with the president. They understand his style, and they're ready to move forward. They still have a lot of things, though, that they have to come to agreement. Kevin Brady, who's the chairman of Ways and Means, says that the House plan and the White House plan are about 80% in agreement on taxes, but it's those 20%, those details about what the rates are going to be for corporations, if they're going to have that controversial border adjustment tax. Those are the things that they still have to work out.
Megan, there's all the difficulty with tax reform. There is Paul Ryan's avowed enthusiasm for tax reform. How does the White House, how does Republican leadership keep this health care reform from withering on the vine? In other words, tax reform is going to attract so much attention and focus now. How are they going to try to see health reform through?
Well, basically, they're going to adopt a lot of the same strategies that they had moving forward, that they used in this fight, having had that devastating loss, and what they learned from that, and really doing their homework, doing their outreach, going member to member. Donald Trump now knows a lot more members than he actually ever knew before. And I think but the Senate is a very different animal, and you got people like Rob Portman, like Lisa Murkowski, like Susan Collins in Maine, who's thinking about running for governor, who have very different interests at stake than you do for a lot of House members. Looking forward to 2018, there's a lot of different balances, in effect, particularly in states, too, that expanded Medicaid. The Medicaid rolls are now 16 million people. Those the governors and how they're going to play this fight, those people who really see the devastating impact that could have on low-income Americans in their state. Governors are really going to be out there on this issue as well. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard for them. There are so many elements of this bill that are so distinctly unpopular. The Republican Party has made a huge gamble on explaining the competitive improvements that can be made by reintroducing competition into this market, hopefully galvanizing insurers to provide more choice, more low-cost plans to people. But I'll tell you, when you look at the numbers on the polling on this bill, they are pretty dire.
And Edgerton, how happy is Paul Ryan with the fact that we now know the name of the Tuesday Group or the Freedom Caucus? As he tries to coalesce this party, how disadvantageous is it that we know of all these splinter groups and think less perhaps of the Republican Party as one cohesive item?
Well, Paul Ryan always says that he prefers a bottom-up process, that he gives deference to committees of jurisdiction on different kinds of legislation. But, you know, he is not stood up to be a strong-handed leader. And part of that is the way that his predecessor, John Boehner, had to resign his speakership. He was kind of pushed out by the Freedom Caucus. So I think Paul Ryan recognizes that there's no fighting this, that he has to let these conferences work out their differences. And Mark Meadows, who's the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, said to me yesterday, he said, in future negotiations, we know now that we have to put forward at the very beginning what are our must-haves and what of our would-like-to-haves, because that will make the negotiation go much smoother and hopefully have a more clear picture of where everybody stands on tax reform, which is going to be really important when we get to controversial things like the border adjustment tax. You have to know who can accept that and who is very starkly against it.
Laura Davison, last question to you here. There's some quiet on Capitol Hill this week as lawmakers are on recess. What do we know of the timetable going forward here? We've seen the one-page sheet of principles from the White House. How's that being chewed up or chewed over on Capitol Hill, and when can we see some movement, do you think?
Well, we won't see anything until the White House and the House are in agreement. They have decided in the House that they're not going to move until they have something from the president that they can agree with and that they feel confident that they can go ahead and move out of committee and pass. And so that's what they're working on these next couple weeks. Gary Cohn, White House economic advisor, has said we'll see something in June. You know, these timelines are always fungible, but they do need to move. Lobbyists and economists off the Hill are worried that they don't have enough time to get this passed in 2017, just with how the timeline has been going so far this year.